What you're about to see is not an original creation of my own. This has been created by someone else, and this creepypasta is by no means mine in any shape or form. Full rights go to the original creator of this particular creepypasta story. Please note that this is a horror story and based on fiction. Viewer discretion is advised. For those of you watching this, by the time you see this, it'll probably already be too late for me. But I hope it is not too late for you. Those of you who watch, hear my story, understand the pain and the suffering I've had to go through, and why I make this choice. About a week ago, me and a couple of my roommates went to a friend's place. They lived in an apartment block. About 10 floors up was our friend's apartment. Police were at the scene. Unsure what was going on, I'd assumed there'd been a break-in or something. We went inside, went up the stairs, but when we reached the 10th floor, there were more police on that floor. Turned out that they were at our friend's apartment. I asked the officer what was going on. It turned out that there had been a murder, then suicide. I was aghast. How could this happen? Why would this happen to someone I know? This doesn't happen in real life. It's one of those things you only see on the news. I pressed the officer for more information. What I heard was so unusual. Apparently, according to the evidence that they'd found, the person had killed their girlfriend and then proceeded to kill themselves. I asked them if I could go inside, but they refused. Obviously because evidence and all that. I told them that we all knew him. They said to come back tomorrow if we wanted to pick up any effects. So the following day, I headed back there. My two roommates who were with me couldn't bear to handle it. They were still reeling in from what happened, but I wanted to find out. This wasn't like him. He wasn't someone to go and kill his girlfriend. He loved her. This didn't make any sense. I figured there might have been like a note in his diary or something, but there was an entry, the last entry he made, which was about a week before this happened. He said that he picked up an email, and in this email was just a picture of what he described as a man with an evil grin. There was a few other details in there that I'd rather not go into because some of them are rather personal. I wish to respect my friend's privacy. But there were no more entries after that, which was peculiar. Anyway, I picked up his laptop, and I knew his account details. He wasn't the most intelligent person when it came to passwords. So I managed to get into his email account just to see if there was any, see what this was all about. I found the email that had an attachment on it that just said Grinning Man. And I read the email, but there was nothing in there. I had a look through some of the other entries, but they were just standard stuff. Emails that I had sent and had no reply from, some spam mail and a few other things. So I had a look at this email that had been mentioned in the diary entry. I looked at the attachment, and it was just a face, a really sinister glare, an evil, massive grin, almost like if the Joker had had a massive cheesy grin on his face. But it was just something wrong with that image. I decided to have a look around the place a little bit more, see if there was anything else I could find, but I couldn't find anything noteworthy, except one little slip of paper that I found in one of the drawers. I was surprised that the police hadn't found this, because it seemed like it was a goodbye note, simply saying, "I'm sorry. This is the only way out." I'd never known my friend to be suicidal, but something clearly must have happened that sent him over the edge. Maybe a domestic issue. Maybe they just had a fight and it just got out of control. Maybe he had accidentally killed her and couldn't bear to live with himself. Anyway, I returned home and told my roommates what I'd found out. They were still reeling in from the experience. It was something quite horrific. I was no bastion of strength. It had affected me, but I wanted to find answers rather than just wallow. Anyway, we proceeded to go to our separate rooms as night fell. I fell asleep as well, but during the night I had unsettling dreams. I can't remember them too clearly, but I do remember a face staring at me with a grin on his face. It was unnerving, but I've had nightmares before, so when I woke up in the morning I didn't pay much heed. But if I had known what was coming, perhaps I would have done something more about it. Perhaps things wouldn't have panned out the way they did. I took our pet for a walk. We had a pet dog in the place as well, which was surprising since normally you can't get dogs in a rented place, but guess we were lucky. It was my turn to walk him, so I took him out. As the day drew on, we were still trying to collect ourselves from what happened to our friend. It made no sense, but there was no sense in wallowing in that. We just had to move on. The night drew to a close, and once again we all went to our separate rooms, and I drifted off. I had more nightmares again, this time a little bit more vivid, and with the image of the Grinning Man once more staring at me. It seemed to be hearing whispers from his direction as well, but I couldn't make them out. They were very subtle, but they were there. When I awoke, I awoke in the kitchen. It took me a moment to work out what had happened, because the last time I'd been sleepwalking was in my younger days. But I'd never woken up in another room before. I was a little bit unsure of myself, but maybe with everything that had just happened, maybe it was just a lot to take in. Maybe my mind was still very active. I was surprised, but not too worried. As the day went on once more, we managed to console ourselves about what had happened. The funeral was still to come. I guess the family still needed to process what happened as well. Plus the police were still making sure of their facts, but it seemed like there was no unusual circumstances behind it other than the suicide and the death, but it was case closed. That night I fell asleep again, just like any other, but I had more nightmares. Grinning Man once more. It was almost becoming rhythmic. Whispering was becoming a bit louder. I still couldn't make out what was saying. But there was one thing I heard, which was knife. I couldn't make out all of it, just every now and then I could just make out that one word being whispered, almost as if it was being whispered into my ear. When I awoke this time, again I was in the kitchen, but I had raised a butcher's knife out of its holster. It was quite unnerving. I couldn't work out why I had raised the butcher's knife. It didn't make any sense. But I guess I was just sleepwalking again. Perhaps the thought of what happened to my friend was starting to get to me. I spoke to my roommates about it, and they seemed more concerned with their own sorrows. I didn't press the issue because it was quite disturbing, and we had enough to deal with. I kind of wish I had pressed the issue a bit more, because what happened after this was most shocking. The next night, I had more nightmares with the Grinning Man. This time he seemed to be a bit closer, more distinct. The whispering was incoherent, but I heard the term dog. I couldn't make out anything else, just dog. And this is where things get very disturbing, because when I awoke from my sleepwalking, I was standing over the dog. There was red on him. I couldn't believe it. It took me a moment to focus my eyes to find out what was happening, what had gone on. In my hand was the butcher's knife, also red. I froze. I couldn't believe what had happened. Why was I standing over my dog with a butcher's knife? This was most unsettling. When my roommates came down and found what was before them, no one could believe what had happened. I explained to them that this is how I awoke. They found it hard to believe, but I was insistent that this is what happened. I told them about the dreams. They thought I was going mad. They decided to go stay at their own family's place. They weren't very comfortable being around me, and I don't blame them. They weren't sure what was happening, what had gone on. I suppose the grief of our friend dying before was still playing on them. They weren't able to process properly what had happened. They weren't able to believe that I was able to kill. I couldn't believe that I was able to kill, but something was controlling me in the dreams. Something was leading me to do these things. Anyway, the following night, I was at home on my own. We had already buried the dog outside, but I didn't want to sleep. But my eyelids grew heavy and I drifted off. I could see the Grinning Man once more in my dreams, whispering. But this time I could hear some of the terms a little bit more. Get them. Get them all. When I awoke, once again, I had had a butcher's knife in my hand. I was in the room of one of my friends, but obviously they weren't there at the time. They had stayed away, which was lucky really, because I was standing over a bed with a knife in hand. But they weren't there, which was lucky, because who knows what would have happened if they were there. I was starting to realise what was happening. I couldn't believe why this was happening, but it was happening. One of my friends came back to see how I was, to see how I was coping. They didn't know about what happened to the dog that was there. I wasn't able to tell them. I couldn't bring myself to do it. But they could see how frantic I was. I was very edgy, nervous. But they made a colossal mistake. They decided that they wanted to stay the night to keep an eye on me. I insisted that I was fine and that it probably was best that they didn't, but they didn't want to listen to me. They knew how frantic I was. I tried to explain to them that it probably wasn't the best idea, I just needed to be alone. But friends being friends, they stuck by. They decided to sleep in one of the other rooms. The spare room that we had, in case we had guests over. I was so afraid to sleep that night. I was concerned about what was going to happen. And when I did eventually drift off, the whispers started again. They were telling me, edging me forwards, guiding me, leading me, driving me to kill again. I managed to wrestle myself awake, butcher's knife in hand once more, at the door to the spare room. Thankfully I hadn't walked in yet, but my hand was on the handle, knife in hand. I managed to wrestle myself away. I put the knife back in the holster, and retreated back to my room. When my friend woke up, I managed to convince them to go home. It took a lot though. I did have to yell a lot. But I managed to get them away. I then bolted the door, locked all the windows. I didn't want anyone coming in. People tried to phone, but I didn't answer. Someone even tried knocking on the door, but I wouldn't answer. I was too afraid of what would happen if people came back in. And it dawned on me, every night this was going to happen. The Grinning Man would keep leading me, driving me to kill the people I know, people I care about the most, almost as if it was some sort of sadistic game. I then realised what had happened to my friend before. They were being driven by the Grinning Man to perform such psychotic deeds. And when he woke up, realising what he'd done, he could not bear to handle it. I then realised what I had to do to put an end to this, to stop this from happening, so that I wouldn't harm anyone else. I have to make the ultimate sacrifice, to protect those around me, to make sure that no one else suffers. If you are watching this, these are my last words to you. If you see an email from a random place with a file attached with a picture stating Grinning Man, do not approach, do not open it. And if someone says to you about a Grinning Man in their dreams, do listen. It is not their fault, but that doesn't mean that they're not a threat. I must now do what I must. May this story warn those around me, and so that those who have seen my actions understand why this has happened.